Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Supplement. Coming up on today's show, Wembley, it's for sale. Will the FA really flog the National Stadium for £800 million? Harry Kane, he's got an apology from the FA for their disrespectful tweet last weekend, but it's the Spurs striker being too sensitive. And it's all down to the magic man, Mo Salah. Liverpool preparing for that Champions League semi-final second leg against Roma on Tuesday night. Here to discuss all that and much more, Andy Dunn is the chief sports writer at the Daily Mirror. Alyson Rudd is a sports writer with The Times. Matt Law is the football news correspondent at the Daily Telegraph. Morning to you guys.
Morning.
Good to see you. Thanks for coming. Don't forget, you can tweet the show at Sunday Sup. The best will appear on your screen over the next 90 minutes. OK, let's have a look at the papers then. The Mail on Sunday, let's kick off with them. A shame this is overshadowing Liverpool's second leg against Roma. Red Storm, Italian police inflaming fears over that Champions League tie with threats of an attack on Liverpool supporters. Liverpool angry at the lack of help to keep their supporters safe. That game, of course, on Wednesday night. Liverpool exclusive on the back page of The Sun. Salary doubled. Mo Salah about to get a new contract at Anfield. £180,000 a week, according to them. Big story, this one in the Sunday People. John Richardson with it. Scotcher, Stevie G, leaving Liverpool. He's going to take that job at Rangers, according to the People this morning. Sunday Times, love this front page. Wilfried Zaha on form and on fire yesterday for Crystal Palace. He scored, it's crystal clear. Palace staying up 38 points. They're 11th in the Premier League table after that thumping 5-0 win over Leicester. Is it so clear for Southampton? It's looking a bit brighter, looking a bit better. Dusan Tadic with 2 goals yesterday against Bournemouth. For Southampton, Mark Hughes' side in with a shout. What about this story? King Rafa Benitez leaving Newcastle. He's on the wanted list of Leicester City, who were beaten by Palace yesterday. That's the Daily Star this morning. Neil Moxley's column. Harry is living on Golden Pond life. This is about Harry Kane and the sensitivities around social media and Twitter. We'll get into Harry Kane in part 2 of today's programme. Part 1, though, where else would we start but with Wembley? And Sam Wallace's column this morning. The FA's track record hardly inspires confidence if they go on to sell Wembley Stadium. And Andy, good timing to have you on, Andy. Goodbye to Wembley, an icon and a cash machine that the FA will regret selling. That's Andy's column this morning in the Sunday Mirror. Let's talk to you about that column now, Andy, because you're not in favour of the FA selling Wembley Stadium. You go on to say, no matter what the stipulations are put into the contract of sale, that Shad Khan, even for £800 million, will eventually do whatever he wants to do with that stadium. Just talk us through your reservations about this sale.
I've got reservations on so many levels.
Yeah.
Initially, if you are going to sell it, surely you put it out to the highest bidder. Surely, if you're going to sell your house, you put it on the market. It doesn't seem to have been the case this time. It seems to be a deal that's been quite a while in the making with Shahid Khan. Between the two parties. So I don't see that the process, if they are going to sell it, their duty is to get the biggest amount of money for it. So I don't particularly see how that's been done at the moment. Secondly, he will do, if you pay £800 million or whatever the figure is for the stadium, it's yours. You can't sell something and keep it. So this idea that the FA will have these clauses in, so OK, England will still play there. But what would Shahid Khan, for example, he'd love England to play there because it'll be an extremely lucrative thing for him to have there at Wembley. But would you want the FA Vase there? Would you want the FA Trophy there? They're both on the same day now, aren't they? Which gets 30,000 people. You might want a concert that day, which would be, far more lucrative. The FA can't give over the stadium and then have control over it. Not when you're paying £800 million. The other reservations are, one, I know what people will say, and I don't want to preempt the arguments, but what people have said who are for the sale is that it's only been owned by the FA for 19 years. But then that was sold as a good thing of football taking ownership of the stadium, of English football taking ownership of its own national stadium. Secondly, people will say, well, look at Germany or Spain, they don't have a national stadium. Well, then surely then it being almost unique is a good point. That's why it's famous around the world. Mm-hmm. So I don't really think, and then finally, of course, the crux of the matter is the, however much, once they've paid off the debts, is the £500 million going to go into grassroots football? Well, then once it's gone, and once it's in, and, a lot of people will be quite sceptical as to how much will go in, but once it's gone, that's gone. What then? What then? So I'm not talking in 10 years' time or 20 years' time. We're talking 30, 40, 50 years' time. Surely Wembley is a commercial success. So surely to keep hold of it for the long term, that just makes sense to me, rather than take the lump sum that you're going to then say, right, as if it's going to be that simple just to bob this lump sum into grassroots football, transform everything, and we're all good to go for the future forever. I just don't see that, you know, I just think that what it was sold to the people as was that we're taking ownership of this stadium and, you know, it's going to be our stadium, it's going to be English football stadium, and it's not. In 20 years' time, it's going to be it's going to be an NFL stadium. That's it. It will be primarily an NFL stadium in I don't know, 10, 15 years' time.
Ali, we of course, we all on this table had the privilege of watching matches at the old Wembley Stadium and, of course, at the new Wembley Stadium. What does the venue mean to you?
It doesn't mean that much, actually. And this is why I would disagree with you, Andy. In principle, yes. If someone knocks on your door and says, I want to buy your house, you don't say, oh, OK, let's talk, let's not tell anyone else. Let's not put a sign outside the front door. But the fact is, the fact they've had these long conversations that have been organic, I think the FA have realised there aren't 20 billionaires out there who have this feeling for Wembley Stadium. It means much more as a stadium to Shad Khan, an American, than it does to me, an English person living in London. When I see Wembley, I see what's wrong with it. I see the pizzas are too expensive and too rubbish, and it feels a bit of a rip-off place. It's not a very beautiful stadium. Architecturally, my heart doesn't soar when I walk towards it. It can sound, you can hear a pin drop sometimes because it just isn't marketed that well. It doesn't always generate that sense of iconic flavour, whereas Shad Khan actually thinks it does. He's in love with the place. So why not sell it to someone for whom all the things I think are slightly naff, the positioning of it's not even in the most beautiful part of London. If you come to London just to go to Wembley, you're not seeing London at its best. It can be very congested and difficult to get to and difficult to get out of. Shad Khan thinks the transport links are amazing. He also thinks he can do it up. Even though we think of it as the new Wembley, he thinks it's getting a bit tatty. He wants to invest around 80 million quid doing up all the bits that are fraying around the edges. And the FA have found themselves criticised over the past few years for treating it as a commercial entity. So when you have the FA Cup semi-finals there, they're held there not for tradition, they're held there because they make money. And the FA constantly being battered for treating Wembley as a cash cow or trying to make it profitable when they should be thinking about the beautiful game. If you take away your responsibility to make money on a day-by-day basis to someone else, then you can free yourself up to sort of talk about more theoretical things like making football better in this country with new pitches and investment.
But, I mean, so are we led to believe that he wants to buy it because he's in love with the place? Or because he wants an NFL franchise there? Shad Khan, there's no sentiment involved, surely. I mean, this is a great business proposition for him. He's getting a ready-made stadium for, in future, an NFL franchise, and for whatever else he wants there, concerts, etc., etc. It strikes me as a remarkably good business deal. It looks cheap to me. I mean, it actually looks cheap. So I understand, yeah, he may be in love with the idea of Wembley, etc., etc. But he's doing it because clearly to him it's an extremely good business deal.
He's not buying it because
he's not some philanthropist.
He's always had his heart set on buying Wembley. But the point is, if you were the FA and you said, "Here's the for sale sign," and highest bidder wins, you don't know what you're getting. Someone could buy it with really a non-football heart completely. At least Shad Khan has had these long conversations where he said, I want it to be a football stadium, not just an NFL stadium.
Would you sell it to Roman Abramovich? Would we all be as happy and as relaxed as everyone seems to be? Well, for example, that's just apropos.
The first person I thought of when I heard about the sale was Daniel Levy. Because Daniel Levy would have relocated Tottenham to Wembley Stadium full-time had he had this opportunity. But 2 years ago, he didn't seem to have this opportunity. And now he's building a stadium which will be one of the best structures, one of the best architectural structures in the country at White Hart Lane. Why didn't he buy it?
It's all,
Tottenham would have played there full time.
Did he know? Did he have a chance? Did he have a chance to put a bid in?
I mean, it has been a sort of multi-use stadium throughout the years. I mean, in the modern Wembley, the new Wembley, it's had the concerts, it's had NFL coming over. It's not just been this sort of football stadium, it's not just been for the England team. And then back in the day of the old Wembley, when, all the nostalgia comes from, and this week we've seen all the pictures, obviously, the 66 team. They used to have a dog track round it, and they used to have the dogs there. I think before the 1970 final, they had the Horse of the Year show the week before the FA Cup final, which wrecked the pitch. So it's not been this place where it's kind of been left for football for the whole time. So I don't his initial plans that we know about, I don't see a problem with. If it is going to be a few NFL games here or there, we're keeping them there for a certain amount of time, we'll take them on the road a bit, that's fine. I do agree with Andy. What happens in 10, 20 years when he gets his franchise over, we don't really want it to become just an NFL stadium, I don't think.
But we accept that's what it... Well,
That's
we
got to
predict
be the
that's what
long-term
it's
aim.
meant to be.
It's got to be. I mean, we don't know for sure, but you can only predict that looks like the long-term aim. It doesn't make any sense otherwise. The deal for him doesn't make sense.
Will the Star Spangled Banner, will that be fluttering in the wind at Wembley Stadium in a few months' time?
Shad Khan would like... I mean, I think it's around 18 to 20% of the revenue he gets from Jacksonville Jaguars games come from the ones that are played at Wembley Stadium. They're a small, new NFL team, and they need a bigger audience. He bought Fulham primarily because he felt there was synergy between the fans of Fulham and the fans of the Jaguars. He felt like he could create a double base of fandom there. You're sneering at that.
No, I'm not saying
It really didn't look
I'm not. I understand. I just think that Wembley is... I know it's had all sorts of things there. You know, he had a monster truck show there,
It was
didn't it?
basically a national... It wasn't
That
a
was not
national
long before
football
England and
stadium,
Croatia, was it?
It wasn't a national football stadium, was it? It was like a national stadium.
It was the
Knievel
Empire.
used to be on there.
But when it was first built. But that's it. We've moved on and we've made it. And the FA of all, most people, the FA have actually said, this is our spiritual home. It's become our spiritual home. It's going to be the home of probably the Jacksonville Jaguars. That is the bottom line. And in the end, I know it sounds very romantic and nostalgic, but kids grow up dreaming of playing at Wembley. And if they can't play at Wembley because an NFL game is on there, then...
But they did before when Evel Knievel was driving a motorcycle on there.
Yes. But if it's primarily an American football stadium, that's
where I agree with you.
I think long term, that's the issue.
Yeah.
Where do you say, you're the football association, so where do you say, oh, actually, we're selling this now and eventually it will become an NFL stadium with the occasional football match there?
That's where I agree with you.
I think.
Matt, do you trust the FA, with £500 million burning a hole in their pocket, do you trust the FA to distribute this cash properly and correctly?
I trust their intention.
And are you happy with that? We'll flog the National Stadium, here's 1,500 3G pitches, we'll rule the world in 20 years' time.
I don't think they're trying to pull the wool over people's eyes with what they're saying and the fact they'll put it in a trust fund and all that business. I don't think there's any sort of backhanded deals going on or anything like that. What I don't trust is that it will do the amount of good that possibly we're being sold on the back of it, that all of a sudden it will make such a difference to kids' football. And as Andy said, it's only a finite amount of time that can work for. Eventually that money runs out and then it's gone. You've got no income from it to put back in. So it can only work, that can only help for a certain amount of time and it would have to have quite a quick impact. I do trust their intention is good with the money. Yeah.
And if it doesn't work, Ali, how will we feel about, well, we've lost the National Stadium for good?
You can write into the contract that you don't lose it for good. I mean, there are lawyers who can make that work. You
So
have to assume
like
just
Gareth
because
Bale
of
and
5
Real
years'
Madrid,
time.
we can buy it back.
Well,
get an
there
option
won't
to
be a
purchase.
buyback clause, but I think you can write in that there has to be a certain amount of football, soccer played there, and that there has
You're
to
buying
be...
into this already, aren't you?
Plus-
Didn't take long.
Plus, to be fair, Alyson, why wouldn't Shad Khan want football there? It's they go to people mention, oh well, maybe the semi-finals. A good thing will be the semi-finals might move away. But why would he want them to move away when you're almost guaranteed a sellout? 80-odd thousand there for the Man U game and 75,000 or whatever it was for the Chelsea-Southampton game. So why would you if you were the owner of Wembley Stadium, you'd want football there. You'd want the FA Cup final there. You'd want the FA Cup semi-finals there. You'd want a big England game there, not necessarily maybe some of the other ones, but you might not want the other games there. You might not want the Division 2 playoffs. You might not want the FA Vase or the FA Trophy. And you couldn't write all of those in, could you? But I've no doubts about it. And I agree with everyone. I think the intentions of the FA are obviously... no one's thinking they're trying to make a few quid. They're trying to basically address a problem with grassroots football that they've found difficult to address through other means.
It's a long time we've waited to solve this problem.
Perhaps.
I mean, When I was a kid, people were moaning about muddy pitches and it affecting the style of play of English football, and we're still talking about it. I went to Iceland a month or so ago to find out why they're doing so well. It's because they've invested in these huge football halls that put our indoor facilities or 3G facilities to shame. We don't have the problems that Iceland have. We can play football all year round. They can only play for 6 months, 5 months of the year. And yet their grassroots investment looks far more superior to ours. It's about time we built things for football in this country.
How do we feel about the national team going out on the road to play their games at St James's Park, Stadium of Light, the Emirates maybe, Stamford Bridge, wherever, Old Trafford?
Yeah, I've always liked it. I've always thought it captures, when it goes on the road, it captures that city and the surrounding areas for that amount of time, for the build-up to it and the match itself, far more so than when it's just in Wembley and you're asking people to come from all over the country, which in fairness they do. I mean, the crowds at Wembley for any game, England game, are amazing. But I do think it makes more of an occasion of those sort of Wembley fortnights or weeks when you take it on the road. I think it makes people feel connected with it. Obviously, if you've got a player from that club in the squad as well of the town they're going to, that helps bring it. I think it's a good thing. I think it's a really good thing, and I'm looking forward to. We've got one at Ellen Road coming up, haven't we? I'm looking forward to that, seeing how that goes. It just brings a different dimension to it, and I think it gets the whole country properly involved.
Andy, you were writing when the England team were away from the old Wembley Stadium while the new stadium was being built.
Yeah.
How did you feel about covering the national team when we were waiting for the new Wembley Stadium to be built?
Absolutely fine. I mean, it's that.
Did it feel like England didn't have a national stadium anymore, or were you always looking forward to going back to Wembley
Well,
at some
looking forward
point?
to going back to Wembley at some point. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, at the time when the costs were mounting up of building the new Wembley, I was probably as sceptical as most people about, well, do we really need it? You know, and if we do need it, do we actually need it there? But then once it's been built, I've been convinced that it was a good thing. It does feel like a home. It feels like a home of the FA. It is the home of the FA. It feels like the home of England. And it feels like the home of football, of English football. Now, I love going on the road. You know, on the road, where it was great. We had some great games at Anfield. I remember playing up at Sunderland, the Stadium of Light. And that's great, and they can still do that. You don't have to sell Wembley to force yourselves to do that. Basically, because you're going to be forced out because the NFL might be played in the autumn, so you take the England team on the road. I think you can still do that, but it still felt Wembley just, I don't know. You know, yes, it's a new stadium, but it still felt like a home to the game. And you know, it's funny when we talk about the semi-finals being at Wembley, and almost all of us would say it's a bad idea. You know, what a shame they're not at Villa Park, Old Trafford, wherever anymore. The final should be Wembley should be there only for the final. Yeah, I spoke to fans, say Manchester United fans who I know, who came down for the semi-final, and yeah, it had an absolutely brilliant day. All these people who on their behalf we complain about the inconvenience. They can't get the train home. It's going to cost them fortunes. The pizza's expensive. You then speak to them. It helps that they've won, but you then speak to them. They've had a great day. People still have a great day at Wembley, and they might go into London first and come out. So there's no doubt. And again, Matt's right. The crowds for England games at Wembley just never ever cease to amaze me, considering some of the stuff that you actually see on the pitch.
Yeah, I think if anyone at the FA just listened to Andy Dunn for the last couple of minutes, couldn't possibly sell that stadium after that, could you?
I think they probably will.
We'll see. All will be revealed. OK, all will be revealed at Ibrox a little bit later on. Is Steven Gerrard really about to take the Rangers job? More on him next. OK, let's talk about Steven Gerrard now. Sunday People back page Scotchers, John Richardson's story saying that Steven Gerrard will take that job at Rangers. Graham Souness, of course, former Rangers manager, writing in the Sunday Times this morning, he says, "You're a brave man, Steven, but he does have to take it." Ali, what are your views? Steven Gerrard, a year into his coaching career with the under-18s at Anfield. Well, he's got this opportunity at Ibrox. Does he take it?
Well, he's passed the first test. If he has indeed said yes, he's passed the first test of management, which is to have the ego to always say yes. Weirdly, when he was offered, as we were discussing off air, the MK Dons job and turned it down, there was a ripple of, oh, is he too scared? Well, why has he said no? I mean, you know, it's very hard to say no.
Because they've just been relegated, yeah.
But even so, people think, well, have you said no? You can only say no so many times if you're a prospective manager or indeed a manager. You are expected, unless you've being courted by several clubs at the same time, and therefore you have to choose just one. You're effectively saying no to others. If a big club, famous club, comes in for you, I don't see how he can say no, because it's like he's saying, I'm tentative about my ability. I think I need longer with the youth teams to work out who I am. It makes him look a bit fussy. I think if he's really wants to be a manager, this shows he's prepared to dive in. And in some respects, it's a cauldron there. It's going to be so difficult. Scottish football, the rivalry between Rangers and Celtic. You have no private life at all. I was talking to Mark Warburton, ex-Rangers manager, about you can't go to the supermarket. It's just, I know anyone with any degree of high profile finds it difficult at the supermarket. It's a degree above in Glasgow. It's difficult. And he's famous. He's already famous. He's already famous, so he can probably. He's had some taste of what it's like to have no private life and to be in a goldfish bowl, if you like. But I think it's such a tough job because Rangers don't have the resources, do they, to challenge Celtic? And if he's being promised them, where are they going to come from?
You've got one
real?
job, haven't you, to beat Celtic? I mean, that's the Rangers' job in a nutshell. Success or failure is whether or not you beat Celtic, and
plus
that's difficult.
Brendan.
Well, plus Brendan.
His former manager.
Yeah, exactly. But that looks difficult at the moment. They look a long way behind them, but it's one club you've got to beat. I mean, if you can get above them, you're an absolute hero, and he'll be. If he does, the other thing about it is if he has a season where he finishes above them, he'll be in for everything after that. I mean, people will be praising him to the hills, and every big Premier League job that comes up, he'll get a mention.
It's going to add some workload to add a bit more workload to our job, isn't it? We'll be up there every 5 minutes.
It's no hardship, is it? No hardship going up to see.
But it's another club to cover, isn't it?
It is, but again, I mean, absolutely no hardship going to watch Rangers Celtic and indeed Scottish football, not at all. It's a really, but as soon as it's right there, I mean, a brave man. It's a really tough gig for your first managerial gig because you're not just going in and dealing with the team.
That's his first, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But you're not just going in there and dealing with the team and coaching them on the training field and going out and doing your sort of, media duties. Everything else that goes with managing an old firm team, I mean, must be incredible. You're right. The pressure must be, very intense, and you've got to deal with all the sensibilities. I just think it's a really, really tough gig for your first managerial job. But I do agree that it's probably one that he can't turn down. If we think, what's the end game for Steven Gerrard's managerial career? It will be clearly he would love to manage Liverpool. I probably agree with you. Had Brendan stayed and he was still there, that might have happened then. But now he has to go somewhere else because Klopp is there for the long term. Klopp has made it clear, and no one at Liverpool's got any reason to disbelieve him, that the minimum he will be there for is the remaining 4 years of his contract. So he's got 4 years of his contract through to 2022. That is the absolute minimum Liverpool expect Klopp to be there. So unless there was a dramatic downturn in fortunes because he's so well loved there, Klopp, that's happening. Now, Steven just can't stay there for 4 years, and just wait for that. So he has to go and do something. And as you say, if you can imagine, if he goes to Rangers, proves himself there, gets close to Celtic, he doesn't have to... That is his one job, to beat Celtic. But to be up there actually challenging with them and making it nip and tuck, I mean, what are they, about 10 points behind this season? It's not a massive
even
chasm.
further today if they lose
season.
at Celtic.
Yeah, sure. But it's not a huge chasm right at this moment. It's a big gap. It's clearly, there clearly is a distinct difference between the two clubs. But he could possibly do that. And he will also, I guess, have the caveat that if it doesn't quite go to plan, there are issues at Rangers in terms of being funded enough to get close to Celtic. And Celtic, of course, have the advantage of having the Champions League money. They have the Champions League cash to stay ahead.
When you say about what's the end game as well, if you prove yourself at Rangers, the next job, you can probably go to Liverpool.
Yeah.
If you prove yourself at Milton Keynes Dons, or if you prove yourself at an Oxford or something like that, even if you do really well at Milton Keynes Dons and Oxford, can you go straight to Liverpool? Probably not. You probably need another club in between where you're dealing with a fan base and you're dealing with the other pressures. So it's a brilliant job to be able to go straight from that to Liverpool. In England, he's very unlikely to get a job where he could go straight from that job to Liverpool, because you wouldn't have the crowd, the pressure, everything else that goes with it to prepare him for Liverpool.
And the fact that Brendan Rodgers is the coach at Celtic, would that motivate Gerrard?
Well, I think it might. I mean, I think it's interesting that Jurgen Klopp is so comfortable with Stevie G being at the club, in a coaching role. I think it's quite clear that Brendan Rodgers was not happy with that at Liverpool. He felt the pressure of Steven Gerrard being a Liverpool icon, sort of looking over his shoulder. So there is that sort of tension there, the existing manager with the up-and-coming pupil who might outshine him. That didn't happen at Liverpool, but it might now happen in Glasgow, and it adds. Not that that rivalry needs extra bite, but it would add to it from the two personalities involved, I think. I think Steven Gerrard would like to prove...
global appeal, though, wouldn't it?
And I think Steven Gerrard would like to prove, he maybe didn't feel nurtured by the management there. Maybe he feels he's been nurtured by Klopp, and he'd like to show that, sort of repay that faith, if you like, and say, I've been put on a nice path here. That Liverpool have looked after me. They've given me the under-18s and given me so much support and help. I feel now I can prove to Brendan Rodgers, who didn't quite want me to have that role, that I can do it.
It's always a real dilemma for the really top ex-pros of where they try and go in at. I mean, we've seen it with Ryan Giggs, get linked with so many jobs and turn down jobs, and then you hear he might want different jobs with Swansea and whatnot. And Lampard's going to have it. John Terry says he wants to have a manager. He will have it. It's so difficult to be able to find a good fit, and you're probably not going to get much better at this stage for him than Rangers.
What are the pitfalls for Gerrard taking this job? What are the risks?
Well, the risk is that he doesn't get backed enough, and that it becomes a completely impossible job in terms of trying to get close to Celtic, and that no matter of his own ability, the finances of it just make it completely impossible for him. But without being too disrespectful, there's probably not that many risks, because realistically, are Rangers going to ever finish much worse than second or third at the moment?
And also, Ash, I think in terms of his standing at Liverpool, there's not much of a risk. It was interesting how Klopp was talking about we'll support him in his managerial career and help him, whatever. It's almost as though Liverpool are sending him out on loan. You know, it's like a player, you know, who's sort of 18, 19, you say, oh, you'll go and have a year in the Belgian league, then go and have a year in the French league or whatever. It's like they're saying to Stephen, right, you know, listen, you're not going to be manager here for quite a while. Yeah. Go out, you know, that's a good loan move for you. As a manager, that's a good loan move for Steven Gerrard to go and get a taste of big crowds, big pressure. Go and get a taste of a local rivalry that you've got to deal with. You know, that is every bit, if not more so, more intense than Liverpool, Everton or Man U, Man City. Go and get those things. It's great. I mean, I'm sure Rangers wouldn't see it as this way, but, you know, it's good experience for him for what's going to lie ahead.
It's perfect for Liverpool as well, because, I mean, he'll know Liverpool's best kids. Yeah. What's better for Liverpool than being able to send kids on loan to a club like Rangers to get experience as well?
Who will have the bigger pull when it comes to the transfer market in the summer, say? And it's head-to-head Steven Gerrard against Brendan Rodgers.
He's determined to push this Gerrard Rodgers thing.
Sorry.
No, that's right. No.
OK, well, let's throw Aberdeen and Dundee into the mix as well.
Go on, Alistair, you'll have the bigger pull.
Well, it's reached saturation point at Celtic. If you're a player out there thinking, equally, I'm a young player, where am I going to be given the biggest opportunity and be made to feel like I'm important? If you go to Celtic, you could get, you're just one of many very good players who are used to winning all the time. If you go with Steve G at Rangers, then maybe you feel I'll get more attention from the manager. I'll be more important. I'll be the marquee signing. If it's a question of one player and he's choosing between the two, maybe you would choose Steven Gerrard. And also there's the intrigue of it as well, because you'd be with someone.
It'll be a big draw, won't he?
Yeah.
Who's achieved a lot.
It'd be a big draw for players, I would have thought, you know, and for young players. And I'm sure that's, you know, that Rangers have factored all that into account.
Yeah.
Of course, we're not absolutely 100% that Brendan will still be there. Maybe he might get the Arsenal job.
Yeah, you never know. OK. We need to move on because I want to talk Harry Kane. And I'll start with you, Andy, because you were at...
Myself and Alyson were both
Sorry.
there, yes. Yeah.
We can start with Alyson.
No.
Yeah, it's just like you were tossing the ball. Yeah. PFA Awards on Sunday evening. What was your verdict? Ben Perkis, the chairman, made a joke at Harry Kane's expense during his tribute speech to Harry Kane. But what are your thoughts on the sensitivities or the perceived sensitivities and kind of pricklish?
Pricklish, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's quite simple. Correct to be a little bit annoyed about the FA tweet after the FA Cup.
Yes.
The one with Chris Smalling in the pockets thing. Right to be a bit annoyed about that. Although, listen, the first offence on that, I think, is claiming that goal, but we'll probably go back to that. On the Ben Perkis speech, who's the chairman of the PFA, his remark about Harry Kane being so prolific he can score without even touching the ball was, A, not overly funny, it was mildly amusing. It was also in the context of some very complimentary remarks he made about Harry Kane,
And what is a traditionally dry and fairly stuffy evening?
Well, yeah.
You are entitled to...
Yes, and the chairman, will want to make his mark. He just doesn't want to get up there and say, welcome everybody, have a nice night. He wants to make some sort of impression. And as I say, it was in the context of him being very complimentary about Harry Kane. He said he was an example of how a professional keeps going, goes out on loan. It looks as though his career might not be going in the direction he wants, but he keeps at it and is now one of the world's best players. So good, in fact, he says, he can score without touching it. So I really don't think that was the biggest crime in the world. In the same speech, Gareth Southgate, who was in the room and who was about to come up on stage, he cracked a couple of gags at Gareth Southgate's expense. And the England manager was in the room. And he didn't make much of it. So I think that's quite simple. I think the tweet after the FA Cup...
Should you make gags at the England head coach's expense? Man of stature, man of honour and a man of dignity and integrity, should he have made a joke at his expense?
Personally, on the evening, I thought that was more misguided and more ill-advised than the minor quip about Harry Kane. I think if you've got the England manager in the room, you should really
show respect.
Yes, I think a little bit. He didn't...
Particularly given the occasion.
But that was more serious to me than the Harry Kane line, which,
Well, the Harry Kane line was topical. Yeah. And humour is all about topicality, whereas talking about Gareth Southgate pizza adverts and missing penalties is so old now. That's why it felt slightly off. But the Harry Kane joke I actually thought was quite funny. I mean, got the biggest laugh of the night.
Yeah. That's not hard at the PFA.
It's
not since Reginald D. Hunter made his star appearance.
Yeah, no one was laughing that night, that's for sure. Or the few days afterwards.
But yeah, it's just the... So I was surprised when I read the stories that about the need for an apology, etc., whatever. And of course, he did call Harry Kane. I was led to believe, or so it was reported. Yeah. I think it was a little bit over the top, but sensitive on the other one, on the FA tweets now.
Is Harry sensitive? Do you get that impression?
He's certainly not. It's kind of been taken as that maybe he's a bit weak here, and he's definitely not a bit weak. I mean, his strength of character in his whole career to go through all the loans and prove himself and work so hard on his career shows he's extremely strong. And he fronts up to us guys virtually every single week. Again, that shows a strength of character, win, lose or draw. He is obviously a little bit sensitive about... It all stems from the criticism over claiming the goal. I think the FA tweet on the Smalling would have been seen as a bad taste, whatever. But the whole Ben Perkis thing and the wider debate over Kane at the moment all stems from him claiming the goal at Stoke, which I was at. Now, I'm with Harry Kane on this. I don't see the problem in the fact that he claimed a goal that he thought he touched. And yet he's received all this mocking for it. And I think, again, on that, him and Tottenham can understand all the Liverpool players and everything mocking a little bit because it's seen as support for Salah. Yeah. Fine. I mean, his England teammate Jamie Vardy mocked him on Twitter. And other people, I think they were quite surprised at, decided to pile in. And then that's grown and grown. And because of the way social media operates and the way the world almost is now, the mocking of that then starts to turn into a stream of abuse as well, and then almost becomes a different thing. And I think that's why the Smalling tweet from the FA was so bad, because if you looked under the replies below it, it was awful. I mean, it just turned into battering Harry Kane. Now, he's got to be big enough to switch off from that. But it was such a stupid thing for them to do. I could totally understand why they were annoyed about that.
He's never... The one thing that strikes me, though, Matt, is that Harry Kane, our perception of him, this is a guy who's never put a foot wrong. He's dedicated, principled, he's committed to his career. He seems to lead a very balanced life away from the pitch. So why, when the moment and the opportunity presented itself, why did people pile in? This
is what I think has got to him a little bit, and has certainly got to people at Tottenham, is why, given the slightest opportunity, has it become a batter Harry Kane sort of month almost, a take the mickey out of Harry Kane. Now, a lot of people will write it off as banter or will write it off as just good-natured humour, but they see at Tottenham, and Pochettino has spoken about this, an underlying chant that they see that there's a problem in that there's been a chance for people to just decide to go at him and use it as a stick to batter him with, and that has been an old English problem in the past, and it's a shame.
Yeah, go on.
Does Kane have to address the issue? Because I can just see if he doesn't, that this is going to go into the World Cup, the first week of England's preparations for the World Cup. We will inevitably speak to Harry Kane, and he will know what's coming. The FA know what's coming, and so do we.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how we can address it, other than to say that, address the claiming of that goal, which was, obviously an honest thing for him to do. He said he touched it, and he doesn't see the issue with that. So I'm not sure that will solve it. I agree with Matt about what you were just saying before. The ironic thing is that if you are... I've sensed there's a new sort of breed of player, recently, who are great role models. Now, if I look around in the Premier League and I think, well, you know what, now there's some great role models. James Milner, who we saw, has been playing very well recently, a great role model. Jordan Henderson. Harry Kane being one. Again, just as Matt said, I mean, a great example. And a great example in the way that he's persevered, even when his Spurs career looked as though it wasn't going to kickstart. So he's a great example. So in a way, this whole thing is just slightly unfortunate. And the way it becomes the way it keeps going on, is when stories about him getting upset or possibly, a little bit prickly about, I don't know, about a tweet here or about a guy making a throwaway comment at the PFA Awards, the more people will sort of think, oh, you're so sensitive, we don't like our centre-forwards ultra-sensitive. We like them going out there, and being strong and being, oblivious to, impervious to criticism.
But you put your finger on it when you mentioned James Milner, who has the boring James Milner Twitter feed, but he buys into that and he now tweets deliberately boring stuff, and everyone thinks it's fantastic.
Even more boring than James Milner.
Really, Harry Kane should have put something funny out about both incidents, actually. Yeah. Because if there are lots of characters in football who, if they had claimed the goal that we all thought was Eriksen's goal, we'd have interpreted that as, we like the fact he's greedy, and you can't be a good striker unless you're greedy and you want to grab it from your teammates. But because Harry Kane is so straight, so nice, so pleasant, we just see it as a sort of slightly dull and sad thing to do. We've interpreted it because of how he's perceived.
Yeah, to take that goal, when he was claiming that Stoke goal, I thought to myself, the only other player I can think who would do this probably would take a goal off a teammate. It's Cristiano Ronaldo. Being like Cristiano Ronaldo is not a bad thing whatsoever. We should want our players. We should want our players to be that ruthless.
Okay, good stuff, guys. Okay, we're going to talk about Mo Salah next and Liverpool. They're in the Champions League semi-final, second leg against Rome. It's on Wednesday night. We'll talk about that. It's coming next. Welcome back. With us this morning, Andy Dunn, Alyson Rudd and Matt Law. Let's just remind you what's making the headlines this morning. Big story this, John Richardson in the Sunday People. He says, Scotcher, Rangers, they've secured Steven Gerrard. He's going to take over at Ibrox. That's the back page of the Sunday People this morning. Graham Souness, he says, you're a brave man, Stephen. Graham Souness was a brave man. He took that job. He made a success of it. Back to English football, Roy Wonder. Palace beating Leicester 5-0 yesterday at Selhurst Park. They're almost safe, 38 points they've got. They're in 11th place. Southampton, they're alive and kicking. Dusan Tadic with a couple of goals yesterday against Bournemouth, two important goals. We've talked about Andy's column this morning in the Mirror. Goodbye to Wembley, an icon and a cash machine that the FA will regret selling. Back page of the Sun this morning. Salary doubled. Mo Salah about to get a new contract at Liverpool. But that game in the Champions League semi-final, the second leg in Rome, being overshadowed certainly by this story on the back of the Mail on Sunday this morning. Red Storm. The Italian police inflaming fears over that game on Wednesday night. They fear an attack on visiting Liverpool supporters. And Liverpool, they're angry at the lack of help to keep their supporters safe. Let's separate the two issues. Let's talk about the football first. We'll get into the security aspects in a few minutes' time, Matt. But Liverpool's performance in the week on Tuesday night at Anfield was impressive. Of course, 5-0 up. They eventually won that game 5-2 because of the late comeback. Will they get through? Do you expect them to do it?
Yeah, they're 5-2 up. I mean, crikey. I know we talk about the two goals.
Like that Barcelona in the last game,
but
in the quarter-final.
The reason that was so incredible is because it barely ever happens. I mean, 5-2 is a great lead to take, and you'd be mad not to back them. And the one thing this Liverpool team have got is you'd be pretty surprised if they didn't score out there. Jonathan Northcross wrote a really good piece today, actually, about how in the Champions League they have these periods in games, quite often early on in the game, although the Roma home game came a bit later, but they have these periods in games where they just swarm over the opposition and score kind of goal after goal. And you can't see them not having a 20-minute period or so in Rome where they will go for them at some stage and probably score. And they just look so well set up for the Champions League this season. It's just that formula that can be inconsistent in the league has worked so well in the format of the Champions League and against European clubs for them, excuse me, that I think they will get through, and I actually quite fancy them to win the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think against, if we assume that Real Madrid might get through, against a more ageing Real Madrid side, I think their style again of swarming over them could really, really work for them.
Do you think Klopp's a bit prickly at the moment? We saw him last week against West Brom, very, very critical of West Brom's approach to that game at the Hawthorns. Yesterday again, I mean, I know, Andy, that you were there as well, but critical of the officials for not giving a penalty yesterday in their draw with Stoke. Is he a bit sensitive as well? Is it that pressure point? Is it that pinch point of the season?
I wouldn't use the word sensitive. That wouldn't spring to mind for Jurgen Klopp, actually.
I was probably looking for a different word.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I think he's surprising the way he comes out after games sometimes. Liverpool are on a fantastic run. I agree with you. They look well set up to win the Champions League this season. Watching the way Bayern Munich were able to have a go at Real Madrid and with a much older squad with far less pace in it, you sort of think, well, Liverpool would have fun there. I think, if anything, he's just a human being who's feeling the tension. All his eggs are in one basket, which is the Champions League. He doesn't like being asked about priorities. No manager does, though. He'd still like to finish in the top four because what if they didn't win the Champions League? I think probably if there's a prickliness, it's about being accused of not taking the league game seriously enough. Is he rotating properly? And if you are being criticised for your tactics, you almost inevitably criticise the opposition or the officials because that's what went wrong, not the fact that you didn't quite tweak the team correctly. But ultimately, no one's going to dwell on the goalless draw with anybody if they go on and win the Champions League. It's probably good. It's a pretty good thing that he's prickly because
he's just a bad loser, I mean, they
You want him
didn't
to
lose
win,
yesterday, but it felt like he's a bad loser, and I suspect there's not many managers at that level who are good losers, basically, and it's as simple as that. He's a bit overly prickly, I think, yesterday.
You have a right to be. Was it a penalty?
The handball. I was about to say I've seen them given, but I thought, no, you cannot say that. I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I mean, Eric Peters there, I think he was in a natural position and he tried to take his hand away. So I don't think it was a penalty. The goal that Ings scored was just marginally offside over the whole piece. And don't forget, Stoke probably could have scored later on. Over the whole piece, a draw was probably a fair result. But obviously he was annoyed because he's just a little bit wants to get that top four place sorted. It pretty much, well, it's not sorted, but they are still heavily odds on to finish in the top four. But then he'd be prickly yesterday because like the crowd and like a lot of his players seemed to do yesterday, they've got one eye on Rome on Wednesday. And why wouldn't they have? You know, you could just tell the players, I don't know, there was just an element, I think, of certain players, even Salah to a certain extent. You could tell that, I'm not saying they were trying to avoid injury, but there was just a hint that they weren't as physically committed as they normally are at Anfield. That might have something to do with the fact it's also a 12:30 game. The intensity wasn't there. There was no intensity to the occasion at all, really. It's one of those games where you could actually, you know, hear most conversations on the pitch. So it was not intense at all. But I think Klopp overall, maybe he was just a bit sensitive about, you know, everyone expects them to go and win this game. When I say to win this game, to win this tie, to win overall. So that brings with it an element of pressure.
Yeah.
So, you know, if he's being a bit prickly, then I think it's understandable. It's not great at times. It's not great to see. I think he wasn't very magnanimous towards Stoke, where maybe he probably should have been. He was querying why they didn't maybe show a bit more ambition, considering the situation they're in. But, you know, I think he was just straight away. His thoughts are obviously ahead to Rome. And that's probably why I was a bit touchy.
Yeah, OK, fair enough. The best teams, of course, they are relentless. I did say we would separate these issues. Let's talk about this in isolation now, Ali. We've all been to Rome. We've all been to big games that Roma have played in over the years. This one has certainly been whipped up over the last few days. What are your views and what are your feelings towards Liverpool supporters who will travel to Rome? Can the Italian police guarantee their safety in that city?
Well, they're not guaranteeing it, are they? In a sense, it's impossible to guarantee.
Should they be able to?
It's slightly... Whenever there's trouble in England with football fans, we are quick to say you can't blame a whole club for their fans, whether it's England or an individual club. We say it's just one or two people in isolation. They may not even be fans of the club. It's just you'll always get people who behave in an abhorrent way. You can't monitor every single person within the vicinity of a stadium. It's really hard to do that. And the violence that happened before the first leg, Roma couldn't be, Jim Bellotta, the owner, couldn't be more angry about that. These are not people he wants associated with his club, and they may not be proper Roma fans. And people talk about the history of Liverpool and Roma. These were people in their 20s who've been arrested who really don't remember the history of Liverpool and Roma games over the years. They're just people who go out looking for trouble. So I can see why it's hard to be able to guarantee that everything will be perfectly policed when the Liverpool fans go over. In terms of the big numbers of people in places, yes, the police are quite capable of separating when they need to and having the right security in place. It's the alleyways hours before kick-off or hours after kick-off. You can't... Who knows what will happen? And Liverpool fans just have to stay together and not go off to some dark alleyway bar and explore. They have to be sensible. But I was there for the Chelsea-Roma game, and there was some slight worry ahead of that, and it went off beautifully, and the Roma fans were very welcoming. The game was incredible. The atmosphere was fantastic. It was all about football and the beauty of football. There wasn't any real trouble. There was no sense of... There were scuffles, actually, but the sense was that the police were on top of it. So I'd be really sad if Liverpool fans going over there were deeply worried, more than they would for any other big European night. I'm sure the Roma police will be as on top of it as they can be. If they're not saying the right things, that's because they're maybe not as political as we want them to be with what they say. It doesn't really matter what they say. What matters is on the night that they give it their full attention and don't make assumptions about Liverpool fans, but always have a look out for what might be happening. Just that on the wider periphery of the stadium.
Say that one of the most shocking aspects of the violence the other night was the fact it was right outside Anfield. Yes. I mean, it was virtually on the doorstep. Yeah. I mean, you tend to think these days that if you're going to encounter violence, like you say, it's because you've taken a wrong turn and you're up a dark alley away from the stadium. You tend to think once you're in the vicinity of the stadium, everything's very safe and very managed. That was the most shocking thing about it. And actually, certainly not. I was there for Chelsea's one, and it certainly didn't happen with anything I saw when Chelsea were there. But historically in Rome, there has actually been trouble for fans actually on their way into the stadium rather than the periphery, because there's that big, long sort of walk-in over the bridge and that's where trouble has actually occurred in the past.
Yeah.
That's so heavily policed, though, that wall.
It is, but that it's very heavily policed, I'd imagine, in the immediate vicinity around Anfield, and yet somehow it happened right outside the doorstep.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that that semi-final second leg does pass off without incident. Everyone goes to the game safely, returns safely, and enjoys the football. OK, next up we're going to talk about the relegation scrap. Big win yesterday for Darren Moore and his West Brom side to beat Newcastle. Can they stay up? We'll talk about them next. Welcome back. Oh, some big results at the bottom of the table yesterday. Darren Moore and his West Brom side, they beat Newcastle, Southampton 2-1 against Bournemouth. Dusan Tadic with a couple of goals. He finally comes alive. Palace beat Leicester 5-0 at Selhurst Park yesterday. Dunny, what was the biggest result for you yesterday? What was the most eye-catching and most important result?
Well, in terms of stoking up that survival battle, then Southampton's win over Bournemouth, it felt to me like Southampton under Mark Hughes were basically just sort of drifting towards relegation. And from what I could see, it was a very intense performance. It seemed like a good atmosphere. Tadic, as you say, coming back. Don't forget, he didn't start him in the FA Cup semi-final. No. You know, I still say, for all his faults, Tadic, I think you have to start talent like that. And that just felt, with Swansea then getting beat, it felt like we've got a real relegation. Let's put it this way. A week ago, or 10 days ago, we would have sat around here and said, right, that's done. It's West Brom, Stoke, Southampton, gone. There looked to be that divide.
Yeah.
All of a sudden there isn't. All of a sudden there's not that divide. And what happens, even if, say, West Ham get beat today, which, you know, they might well do against Manchester City, brings another one into it. All of a sudden we've got certainly for that final, I mean, I think Stoke are really up against it, but certainly for that final relegation spot behind West Brom and Stoke, there's now a proper battle, and that's come about because of the way Southampton played yesterday. They looked to be up for it. They played some nice football, and Mark Hughes seemed energised by it, whereas he hasn't seemed that way. That's his first win, don't forget, you know. So that might well have just given a lift. So that was the most significant result. Yeah. And of course, Palace making themselves safe.
Well, you've got Roy down as manager of the year, haven't you, Matt?
Yeah, I have. No points, no goals when he went in. A lot of people had written him off after England and Iceland and whatnot, and that was going to be the end of his career.
Sat on this table, pretty much, I would think.
He's done
Sorry. Oh, Ali, that look.
I never wrote him off.
He's done a remarkable job, though, and I'm really pleased for him because he's had such a good...
kill, Alex, seriously. I don't think I didn't see that.
He's had such a good club career, it'd be such a shame if that would have been the sort of full stop on his career, that Iceland defeat, and that was that. And it's brilliant for him, and he's done a really good job, as you well know.
Ali?
I thought the most significant result yesterday was Huddersfield losing, actually. Their goal difference puts them in a slightly false position. So about 2 months before the end of the season, I always predict who's going to go down on the goal difference. It usually comes true. That's what makes it clear you're not coping very well. Their goal difference is poor.
-29.
That's not good. But they're above the relegation places, and they're there because they occasionally are greater than the sum of their parts. Their fans are astonishing, and they do tactically sometimes get it right, but not always. Everton are going through a strange period. They were probably, in theory, ideal opposition, and they couldn't pull it off. And now I really do feel they're going to really get sucked into it.
They've got Man City, Chelsea, and they'll win the last one. They've got Arsenal.
They've got Arsenal, yeah. They've got yes. They might fancy that a little bit, but yeah, they of all the teams above that drop zone, even though Swansea, you look at Swansea's remaining games, you know, they've got a couple of winnable games, and they've got Stoke at home in the last game of the season. Now, if Stoke don't beat Palace in their next game, you know, if Stoke are already condemned, then that game obviously becomes easier for Swansea. Yeah. So you see them as vulnerable. But it can just change in one round of fixtures. It can just change.
OK. I want to touch on Darren Moore as well, the job that he's done in a very short space of time. His body of work is 4 games, isn't it, with West Brom?
2 wins,
as the caretaker manager, yeah. And, he's unbeaten. Another big result for him. We're on reasonably safe ground, I think, to say that West Brom will get relegated. But does Darren Moore, has he done enough to get this job full-time and have a crack at getting West Brom out of the Championship and back to the Premier League next season?
I think they'd lost 9 in all comps when he took it. So, I mean, he could have done more. He could have won all 4, but it's unlikely. He couldn't have done much more.
You're a hard taskmaster, aren't you?
I didn't want to say he couldn't do more when he could have won all 4, but you've got to give him a go, haven't you? You've got to give him a go. The only worry you would have is that it's almost all been achieved when the pressure's off. It's almost like they were down. When he came in, it almost signalled the fact they were already pretty much down. And you do get this with the clubs that are kind of away from the rest. Occasionally at the end of the season, they'll suddenly pick up as a result, the pressure's off. But
I often think the key, Matt, in these situations, when you look at the reaction of the players when they score.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And the reaction of the players against Liverpool last week at the Hawthorns, Manchester United, and the way that Ben Foster spoke about Darren Moore and the previous regime, I thought was very telling.
Yeah, and I was about to say, he's clearly galvanised that squad. They are in with him. I mean, if it's going to be the majority of that squad that has to bring them back up, you'd certainly want him in charge. More difficult, maybe, if there's going to be a lot of change with players going in and planning to bring in a lot of new players. Whether it would work quite so well with a load of players, I don't know. But you only know when you've got to give them a go, and you've got to, really.
And quote to the season must be you talk about them talking about Darren Moore and the way Ben Foster did, but how about when James McLean said, no offence to Alan Pardew, but we now know what we're doing when we go out onto the pitch. Well, I mean, like, you know, no respect, but massive disrespect. Basically, they're bought into Darren Moore. And why wouldn't you? I cannot even imagine for 1 minute why he wouldn't get the job.
Yeah.
I just can't. I mean,
very understated guy as well. I think
yeah. I mean, I just don't see anything to say, well, why would you not give him the job in these 4 games?
Has to get a shot.
I would have said to after he won at Old Trafford, give it to you now. Yeah. You know, start planning for next year as well.
I need you to clear something up for me,
yes.
which is Big Sam. Is he staying at Everton or not? I just don't know which way this goes. After 10 or 15 minutes yesterday, they went 3-0 up, and social media wanted Sam Allardyce out.
Wanted them out. Yep. And even when they were 1-0 up, the chants from the fans were a familiar refrain from the fans, which can't be repeated. However, they then scored a second. And Sam's record over the last 7 games is 4 wins, 2 draws and 1 defeat. And from what he said on Friday, clearly he has met with Moshiri and believes that he has clarity going forward, and obviously implying that he's going to be there next season. I think Everton fans would like to hear that. When I say would like to hear it, want to hear that or otherwise from the owner. And I do think that much. He probably the owner needs to come out and actually clarify this sooner rather than later. You could say, well, why does he need to when Everton are in a healthy position in the league and Sam's got a year left of his contract after this season? So why should an owner have to come out and say, well, you know, listen, he's definitely in next season? Well, we know he is because he's giving you a contract. But I think it would help things if he did come out and do that. It's all I can say from the feedback I get from Everton fans that I know as a sample, there is, for one reason or another, they still have not bought into Sam. It was a tough starting point because basically there was 2 camps. Those who either didn't want him or those who thought he was basically a necessity that they had to have because they were in quite a parlous situation, even though it was relatively early in the season. So once you're from that starting point, it takes a lot to win them round. And if you have a series of games where you're not playing particularly well or you're not playing great football, then they'll jump on that. I actually do think that if unless in the remaining games they have 1 or 2 really bad performances and bad results, I think he'll still be there, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I really do.
Yeah. See what Big Sam can do at Goodison Park next season in that case. OK, next up, we're going to talk about a manager who's definitely leaving. That's Arsene Wenger. He's leaving Arsenal. His last away game, or last time he goes to Old Trafford is today. They play Manchester United. We'll talk more about that next. Oh, emotional scenes there'll be at Old Trafford later on. Last time Arsene Wenger will go with Arsenal, certainly, to Old Trafford to play Manchester United. But let's go back to Thursday night and Atletico Madrid because we were at the game at the Emirates in the Europa League semi-final, the first leg, Ali. The equalising goal, of course, scored by Antoine Griezmann. Is it moments like that that are the reason that Arsene Wenger is leaving Arsenal?
Yes, and in fact, he illustrated that himself because in the post-match press conference, he said, I've seen this so many times. And we have seen it so many times. Arsenal have a lot of possession, a lot of shots, a lot of them off target. They struggle to break down a team that have gone defensive because they're down to 10 men. And you look at the stats and you think, why didn't Arsenal win that game? And because the stats don't add up, you then talk about character and lacking leadership on the pitch. And that is the story of the latter years of Arsenal under Arsene Wenger, and he pointed that out. And after the game against West Ham, which was the game where we were all there because it had just been announced he was going to step down at the end of the season, he said, well, you've all done the obituary writers out of a job when I die because you've all written your pieces now. But he was writing his own obituary then after the game against Atletico, because he was more or less saying, you don't have to speculate, Neil. He said, this is what I've seen so many times. And it's that déjà vu, it's that Groundhog Day element of Arsenal which made the fans get so angry. They were tired of seeing the same narrative unfold, of Arsenal being a really good team but never really punching above where they should be, never having that fight and spirit to grab a trophy that they felt they should get. So that is exactly, in summary, why he's gone, I think.
How will Manchester United supporters treat Wenger this afternoon? Because I don't know if you saw last night, Inter Milan against Juve,
I didn't see.
and the respect that Inter supporters showed towards Gianluigi Buffon. Huge banners unfolded at the San Siro last night, tribute to him and his career. Will Manchester United supporters go the same way this afternoon?
I don't think they'll go.
Will they show him
I think they'll
similar
show
respect?
I think they will show him respect because their recent history, when I say their recent history over the last 2 decades, has been intertwined with Arsene Wenger and Arsenal's history. You know, they were the main rivals for quite a while. I think they'll show him the respect. Certainly Jose Mourinho will show him the respect he deserves. I don't think it'll be overboard. You know, I don't think there's going to be any guard of honour or any special, ovation from the United crowd for him, because, they had a fierce rivalry, and you wouldn't want that rivalry to, we don't want this to be a testimonial game.
English football does things so well at times.
It does. I'm sure.
Why don't they give him the big salute?
English football does competitive football very well, fiercely competitive. So that's what it will be this afternoon. We don't want this to turn into some sort of testimonial game for Arsene Wenger at Old Trafford. But they will. I'm sure they will afford him due respect. It won't be overboard, but they will realise that they had so many battles with different managers. Well, with Ferguson mainly, against Wenger, and that summed up an age. That was an age. It was Arsene Wenger who came along, and Alex Ferguson realised that this guy was bringing with him a major challenge. When he went to Old Trafford in '96, and I think it was Overmars scored. Yeah. That was I don't know. It was the first.
Overmars was the '98. Viltord.
98 was it? Sorry, Viltord 2002. And that was an Arsenal team then that had the character and the talent and the spirit to go to Old Trafford and seal a title win there. We all remember that goal. And in a way, today will be almost... And again, other landmark results. You think, well, when did you really think maybe Arsene Wenger was on the start of a slow downhill journey at Arsenal? And certainly no other result probably comes as close as when they got beat 8-2.
That was in 2011.
2011. And you think then, well, that was... Of all the landmark results, positive and negative, that one was when you thought, you know what, Arsenal really should not be going to Old Trafford and getting beat 8-2. This is a side they once came to and won the title in their ground. You know what,
that's the great shame, isn't it, Matt? Is all those key moments over the years, all those massive games. Go back to 2004, Battle of the Buffet, Cesc Fabregas launching
the pizza 49 game run,
at Fergie. And yet, Andy said perhaps the most striking moment was the 8-2 in 2011.
I don't know that it was the most striking moment of all. Do you think? I mean, I think it was the most striking moment in terms of what Andy says, in terms of where you can separate. They went from proper rivals with United to not proper. It's a great game for showing that, to be able to remember the time when Arsenal had United's number and had Ferguson's number for a while, and then it shifted all the way back. I mean, the 8-2 was really sad, but that's not what I necessarily always think of when you think. You think of Keown screaming in Van Nistelrooy's face. You think of the Giggs FA Cup semi-final goal. When they're proper rivals, you think of Vieira and Keane going at it in the tunnel when, Vieira was trying to get tucked into Gary Neville. Yeah. And it illustrates all that, and it brings back all those memories brilliantly. It is a shame, though, that he goes back now, and there probably will be a lot of respect for him because he's not really a proper rival anymore. And that's shown in Mourinho this week, that Mourinho can be so nice about him and so respectful, is because at the end of the day, he's not been a proper rival for a while. I mean, you half expected Mourinho to walk in with AW on his tracksuit, like he did for Ranieri with the CR, because, you know, it felt a bit fake from Mourinho, but it also just felt like a bit of a pat on the head, you know.
Yeah. I think there'll be respect as well, though, from Old Trafford, because one of the defining images is when he was sent to the stands when it got beat 2-1 in. You remind me. 2000 when he got sent to the stands, had nowhere to sit.
2009.
2009. That's right. And in a way, I'll never forget that picture. I'm sure we'll see it many times again.
Well, you're doing it now.
I didn't even know I was doing that. Where he stands there, and it's just brilliant. Look at that picture. Look at that picture. When you pick up the paper this morning, and the reaction of the fans around him.
They're loving it.
They're loving it. Some of them are laughing. Some of them are absolutely astonished. And the whole crowd is sort of lifted up. And in a way, you know...
Great for... I mean, the selfie culture just begun as well, so people...
Just begun, yeah. It'd be a frenzy now, wouldn't it? It was just... But it was a moment I thought that... Actually, you know, Old Trafford, I think they will show an enormous amount of respect. I think that just sort of, to me, summed up, well, you know what? He's been a fierce rival. Him and Ferguson went at it hammer and tongs, you know. But I always thought, whereas with him and Jose, I know they'll probably try and make up today... I always thought when him and Sir Alex Ferguson, who exchanged many barbs, I always felt that when they sort of had a thawing out in their relationship later in the career, I always thought that was really genuine.
I love that. I don't know if you were there at London.
I thought it was genuine there.
When they won the title in 2004, and someone asked, have you had a... Sir Alex used to write to the managers, didn't he, say, congratulations to winning a title. And someone said, have you heard from Sir Alex Ferguson yet? Have you had the letter? And he said, if it's coming by horse. That was about 3 months down the line. It's still not here. But can Mourinho and Wenger, can managers ever put this stuff to one side? He's done it with Ferguson, to be fair.
He's done it with Ferguson. It got a little bit...
Felt more personal,
yes.
Mourinho. It felt less like...
Vindictive, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Specialist in failure.
Yeah, exactly, and the voyeur and all
yes.
that kind of thing. It just felt more personal. And I think particularly talking to Wenger more than Mourinho, you could tell from Wenger's point of view, and this is only my reading of it, that there was a proper dislike for Mourinho. That I just don't see Wenger ever kind of deciding that, oh, Mourinho's okay actually, and aren't we really great rivals and great pals? Whereas I always got the feeling with Ferguson it was more to do with this intense on-the-pitch rivalry between the two clubs than anything personal dislike. I might be wrong.
I always think as well, even though it's Wenger we're going to be paying tribute to as the season comes to an end and he might leave, you know, English football, we've got to remember that, you know, when people try and want to make good a relationship with him that's gone bad, I think he might not be the easiest person to do that. I mean, let's not forget, you know, in terms of handshaking and etc., he has got form. But it'll be interesting to see how the pair of them get on today. I'm sure there'll be a hug for the camera.
Yeah, hug
Jose
for the
and
cameras and a big embrace between the pair. I'm sure there certainly will be. OK, that's all we've got time for today. Thanks very much to Andy, to Ali and to Matt. I'll see you guys, I'll see you guys again this afternoon. I want to see you at the Olympic Stadium.
Private jet.
London Stadium for West Ham.